France, November 1944. The morning breaks gray over the ruins of a nameless village near the Moselle River. Smoke drifts from collapsed stone houses, mingling with the mist. The ground trembles under distant artillery. Dull, rhythmic, endless. Among the shattered walls, an American medic crawls through the mud, the red cross on his sleeve darkened by soot. The air stings with cordite. Bullets hiss past him, slicing into the rubble. He doesn't stop. Ahead, a voice cries out, not in English, but in German. He hesitates. The cry comes again, weaker this time. A wounded German officer lies half-buried beside the road, his blood mixing with the rain. The medic knows the rule: treat anyone who breathes. Yet the sniper fire hasn't ceased. He looks up. A white flag fragment flutters on a shattered fence. Forgotten, meaningless in the storm of war. Still, he moves forward, hands trembling but steady, crawling toward the enemy who no longer looks like one. In that gray dawn, mercy had a shape. A man kneeling in the mud, saving a life under fire. And this moment would echo through the rest of the war. By late 1944, the Second World War had entered its most merciless phase. France, recently liberated after D-Day, was a graveyard of towns and men. The Allied armies were advancing eastward, through the Ardennes, Lorraine, and Alsace, pushing the Wehrmacht back toward its own borders. Each mile gained cost blood. The euphoria of Normandy had long faded. What replaced it was exhaustion, the grinding industrial slaughter of attrition. The Germans fought with desperation now, not for conquest, but for survival. Their lines were stretched thin, their supply chains shattered by Allied air raids. Yet their resolve remained fierce. For every village captured, there were wounded men, hundreds of them, left screaming in ditches or silent in barns turned into makeshift aid posts. Field medics became the lifeline of both armies. An American medic's world was not one of glory or strategy. It was a crawl through filth and fear. The Geneva Convention of 1929 promised protection for medical personnel, marked by their Red Cross armbands. But on the battlefields of Europe, those promises were as fragile as paper in the rain. Many medics were shot intentionally. Some German snipers saw the cross as a target, not a shield. Yet they went anyway, unarmed, carrying nothing but morphine, bandages, and faith. They worked under shell fire, racing time against death. Behind the front lines, mobile aid stations tried to bring order to chaos. Jeeps and half-tracks served as ambulances, ferrying the wounded to field hospitals that overflowed with shattered bodies. Doctors operated for days without rest, hands trembling from fatigue, sometimes performing amputations with nothing more than whiskey for anesthesia. In this world, compassion was not abstract. It was physical. A hand pressed to a bleeding wound, a whisper of comfort in a language the other man didn't understand. The U.S. Army Medical Department had learned bitter lessons since North Africa. Every campaign, Sicily, Italy, Normandy, refined their system of triage, evacuation, and care. But the European terrain, scarred by hedgerows and rubble, made every rescue a nightmare. And for every medic who saved an American soldier, there were moments when he faced a question with no rule-book answer. What about the enemy lying next to him? The Geneva Convention demanded impartial care. The oath of a medic, though not religious, carried a sacred promise: to preserve life. But on the front lines, hatred was easier to carry than compassion. Soldiers had lost friends to the very enemy they were now being asked to save. It was in this moral wasteland that singular moments of mercy would stand. Out like light through fog, the man in the mud that morning, whoever he was not alone in his courage. Across the front, there were medics who risked everything for strangers wearing the wrong uniform. But to understand how such moments could even happen, we must first see what surrounded them. The world collapsing around both sides. In the fall of 1944, the Western Front was tightening like a steel vise. American and British forces had crossed the Seine, liberated Paris, and were driving toward Germany's western defenses, the Siegfried Line. The Germans, though battered, were far from broken. Hitler had ordered every inch of soil to be defended. Young boys and old men were conscripted into the Volkssturm, their faces pale and fearful behind oversized helmets. Rain turned the roads into rivers of mud. Tanks bogged down, supplies ran thin, and the cold set in. In foxholes and farmhouses, both sides endured misery in equal measure. And through it all, the medics kept moving, crawling through minefields, dragging men through gunfire, turning battlefield chaos into fragile moments of humanity. Their war was not about victory. It was about mercy measured in seconds. As winter approached, the fighting grew even crueler. The next phase of the Allied advance would test not only weapons and will, but the very limits of compassion itself. Behind every battlefield, beyond the noise of artillery, there existed another world. One built not on destruction, but on the struggle to preserve life. In the shattered remains of barns, churches, and abandoned schools, field hospitals emerged from nothing. Canvas tents flapped in the icy wind, their interiors dimly lit by flickering lamps. The smell was unmistakable. Blood, disinfectant, and mud. The wounded arrived in endless waves. Americans, Germans, civilians. Anyone caught between advancing and retreating armies. Medical corpsmen worked side by side with doctors, nurses, and chaplains. They were young, many barely out of school, and already carried the haunted eyes of men twice their age. Their hands trembled as they cut away uniforms soaked in blood. The sounds of groans, whispered prayers, and shouted orders merged into a grim symphony that never ceased. And there, amid the chaos, the enemy lost its shape. A German soldier, barely 18, clutching a photograph of his mother. An American private, crying for his brother who lay dead yards away. The differences blurred under the same bandages. War stripped away the flags and languages, leaving only flesh, pain, and the universal instinct to survive. Both armies had medics bound by the same laws. The Geneva Convention recognized medical personnel as non-combatants entitled to protection. They were to treat all wounded impartially, friend or foe. Yet this ideal often collapsed under the brutal logic of the battlefield. Frontline reality cared little for rules. Shellfire didn't discriminate, and neither did fear. A medic wearing a red cross could still be shot by a panicked soldier or by a sniper who saw opportunity rather than law. German medics faced the same risk, often dying while trying to drag comrades to safety. In late 1944, with Germany on the defensive, conditions in their field hospitals deteriorated. Supplies ran out, morphine was scarce, bandages reused, and surgeries performed with instruments cleaned in cold water. Frostbite and infection claimed as many lives as bullets. Still, even in those desperate conditions, moments of honor surfaced. Some German medical officers respected their American counterparts, knowing that, on another front, they might have been colleagues instead of enemies. By the winter of 1944, as Allied forces approached the German border, reports began to surface of isolated truces. Brief, silent understandings between medics of opposing sides to retrieve their wounded. Sometimes, under a white flag or simply under instinct, both sides ceased fire for a few minutes. Men who had tried to kill each other hours before now watched in silence as stretchers crossed no man's land. The front lines were slowly becoming moral frontiers. Each decision, to fire, to hold, to crawl forward, carried not just tactical weight, but ethical consequence. Among the U.S. ranks, the role of the combat medic badge had gained immense symbolic meaning. Those who wore it had faced the worst, and returned to tell others what compassion looked like under fire. They weren't celebrated in the same way as tank crews or fighter pilots, yet within the infantry, medics were sacred. Men who mocked or disrespected them rarely did so twice. For the Germans, the Red Cross symbol carried similar reverence, even as the chaos of retreat eroded discipline. German doctors often faced impossible choices: abandon their wounded to save the living, or stay behind and risk capture, or death. Many chose to stay. This shared suffering, this unspoken brotherhood among those who fought death itself, is what made the rare stories of mutual mercy possible. The closer the Allies came to Germany, the more personal the war became. Villages burned not just as strategic targets, but as homes lost. Soldiers marched past the ruins of schools, hospitals, and churches that once stood for civilization. Every act of compassion stood in defiance of that destruction, and it was precisely in this atmosphere of exhaustion, chaos, and moral fatigue that one American medic would make a choice no one expected: to crawl through the fire, not for his own, but for a dying enemy. That choice would not win a medal. For a combat medic, courage was measured differently. He didn't charge with a rifle. He crawled with a stretcher. His battlefield was not about taking ground, but about reclaiming the dying from it. To be a medic meant suppressing fear so completely that saving life became instinct, not thought. When machine gun fire erupted, others dove for cover. The medic moved toward the sound. It was not heroism as the movies showed it, but a slow, grim determination, the kind born from seeing too much death to let one more life slip away. The medic's oath was unwritten, yet absolute. If he breathes, he lives. It didn't matter what uniform the wounded wore. For many, that distinction blurred during the European campaign. Soldiers saw the same wide-eyed terror in their enemies that they saw in their brothers. When a medic reached a German, he often found no fanatic, just another boy, shivering, bleeding, whispering for his mother. But the act of mercy carried a hidden cost. Every moment spent treating the enemy could mean losing an ally nearby. Every drop of morphine, every bandage used, meant one fewer for his own. The medic carried that guilt, the arithmetic of compassion in a place where death demanded efficiency. And yet, some still chose mercy over anger. Not because it was strategic, but because it was human. The U.S. Army Field Manual defined medics as non-combatants, but the battlefield rarely obeyed the manual. Medics carried no rifles, only pistols at times, and even those were often left behind. Their protection was supposed to be the Red Cross on their sleeve. But by 1944, most had learned that the symbol could invite bullets as easily as spare them. Snipers sometimes targeted them first, knowing that a dead medic could demoralize an entire platoon. When the shooting started, medics moved low and fast, zigzagging between shell holes. They shouted for the wounded, "Hold on!" but often found silence in reply. They memorized where men fell, marking each location in their minds like a grim map. Under fire, they'd crawl out again and again, dragging bodies that still breathed back to cover. Each rescue was a calculated gamble. If they ran too soon, they drew fire. Too late, and the wounded bled out. Every heartbeat was a decision. And yet, the system worked. Brutally, beautifully. The U.S. Army's Medical Corps achieved survival rates never seen before. Field medics stabilized men in minutes, stopping arterial bleeding, injecting morphine, wrapping wounds, and tagging each patient with information for evacuation teams. But the tactical brilliance of the medics went beyond efficiency. It was the trust they inspired. Soldiers fought harder, knowing that if they fell, someone would come for them. That knowledge held entire lines together. When a medic crossed into danger to save even a German soldier, That trust deepened into awe. Men who witnessed it never forgot. They spoke of it years later, in letters home and veterans' reunions, describing how the impossible had happened. Compassion inside the machinery of war. Leadership during war demands clarity. Orders must be followed, emotions contained. But every commander who led men through France and Germany faced moral fractures the rulebook could not fix. When officers saw medics treat the enemy, reactions varied. Some looked the other way, quietly respecting what they could not officially condone. Others raged, calling it weakness or disobedience. To them, saving an enemy was a betrayal of duty and comrades, yet deeper down, most understood. They had seen the same suffering, the same human ruin. Many carried their own memories of German medics tending American prisoners or villagers hiding wounded strangers. These rare glimpses of decency stood as reminders that war did not erase morality. It only tested its endurance. Reports from field units often mention commanding officers halting fire briefly so medics could retrieve wounded from both sides. These were not formal truces, just fleeting gestures of sanity. Sometimes a nod from across a ruined field replaced a flag. Both sides understood that mercy, even for a moment, was a kind of victory. Commanders also knew the strategic power of compassion. News of American medics saving German wounded spread quickly through captured prisoners, softening resistance and fostering trust in surrender. It was unintended diplomacy, a weapon far quieter than artillery, but sometimes more effective. Leadership in war, at its best, balanced duty with conscience. And in the final months of World War II, as victory neared and hatred reached its peak, some officers realized that the war's true legacy might not lie in conquest, but in the fragments of humanity that survived it. From the mud-soaked trenches to the command tents, these acts of mercy began to reshape the meaning of courage. But for the men on the receiving end, the German soldiers themselves, the experience struck deeper than any command could predict. For the German soldiers lying wounded in the mud, the appearance of a U.S. medic was bewildering. Hours before, they had been targets. Bullets, shells, and mortars reducing their world to chaos. Now, a figure in a white armband knelt beside them, bandages in hand. Many German soldiers described the moment as surreal. They expected death. They expected anger. But what they saw was care, fingers pressing firmly over bleeding wounds, words spoken in halting English, and most strikingly, no demand, no threat, no judgment, only the effort to keep them alive. It was a psychological inversion. The enemy had become protector. Those who survived often recounted how the act dissolved the fear and hatred they carried, if only for a few minutes. For some, it sparked shame. They had been trained to despise Americans, to resist, to kill. And yet, someone risking life for them exposed a truth they could not ignore. Even in total war, humans remained capable of goodness. On both sides, soldiers wrestled with the tension between duty and conscience. For the medic, saving an enemy meant delaying his own unit's needs. It meant risking his life under gunfire and artillery. It meant breaking an unspoken code among infantrymen. Hate the enemy, or at least treat him as expendable. Yet, the moral clarity was simple in its essence. Wounded men, anyone who breathed, deserved life. The act itself became a statement. Humanity could persist even in hell. This tension created some of the most profound ethical dilemmas of the war. Men wondered, could one man's mercy compromise an operation? Could one act of compassion weaken the fighting spirit of an army? History shows it did not. It reinforced the values of honor and courage, inspiring others to act similarly when circumstances allowed. Mercy became not weakness, but a different form of strength, quiet, relentless, and defiant. The effect of battlefield mercy rippled far beyond the immediate moment. Soldiers who witnessed the medic's courage reported a shift in perception. They realized that war was not merely about killing. It was about choices. Some developed a deeper respect for the enemy, not out of love, but recognition of shared suffering. For German prisoners who survived such encounters, the memory lingered long after captivity ended. They spoke of the American medic not as a conqueror, but as a human being. Those recollections often influenced post-war reconciliation, turning personal experience into the seeds of historical memory. The medics themselves carried the weight of their actions. They knew that every enemy saved might still rise to fight another day. Yet the ethical clarity of their choice brought its own solace. The war demanded brutality. They chose mercy. That decision, small and fleeting in the scale of global conflict, left an imprint stronger than any battlefield victory. The medics' tools were rudimentary by modern standards, yet revolutionary for 1944. Morphine syrettes, bandages, surgical kits, and portable stretchers transformed chaos into possibility. A medic's technology was precision under fire. The right application of a tourniquet, the correct dose of morphine, the swift removal of a bullet could turn near death into survival. In that sense, medicine itself became a weapon, one aimed not to destroy, but to preserve. German soldiers experienced the unexpected impact of this weapon firsthand. It could neutralize fear, calm pain, and restore the will to survive. In battlefield reports, the presence of U.S. medics often correlated with increased morale among both friends and foes. In a war dominated by tanks, artillery, and aircraft, the unarmed medic wielded technology differently, saving life instead of ending it, and reshaping the moral calculus of combat. These angles, human courage, tactical risk, leadership perspective, enemy shock, moral clarity, psychological impact, and medical technology converge to illustrate a rare truth. Even amid slaughter, war can reveal the extraordinary capacity for mercy. The battlefield becomes not just a place of violence, but a stage for choices that define humanity. And within this convergence, the story reaches the moment that would etch itself in history. The climax, where courage, compassion, and chaos collide under fire. November 16, 1944. A shattered village in Lorraine, France. The morning fog clings to rubble-strewn streets, turning each step into a silent negotiation with death. American forces had been advancing for hours. Tanks ground forward, their treads tearing through debris. Rifle fire echoed from collapsed buildings. Every house could conceal a sniper. Every alleyway promised sudden death. Corporal James "Jim" Harris, a U.S. Army medic attached to the 90th Infantry Division, crawled through the mud. His uniform was soaked, his boots heavy with rain and blood. Around him, men shouted orders, bullets zipped past, and artillery boomed in the distance. Ahead, a wounded German officer lay slumped in the open, clutching his side. His uniform was torn, and his face pale beneath the grime. He groaned, his voice faint in the roar of combat. Harris hesitated. A trained soldier might have ignored him, following the instinct to preserve one's own. But he moved forward anyway. The sniper fire was relentless. Harris's first crawl was met with a sharp crack. A bullet embedded in the wall inches from his shoulder. He flinched, gritted his teeth, and continued. Every second counted. The German officer's shallow breathing measured the rhythm of the fight. One inhale, one bullet, one heartbeat at a time. Harris reached him, hands steady, despite the shaking of adrenaline. He ripped open the officer's jacket, assessing the wound. It was deep but survivable. A quick tourniquet, morphine, and bandages, the basics, and the officer might live. Suddenly, a shell exploded nearby, showering plaster and brick over both men. Harris shielded the German with his own body, mud and dust covering them like a second uniform. When the debris settled, he continued, dragging the officer toward cover. The village had fallen silent around them, a pause in the chaos, almost surreal. German soldiers, lying prone, watched in disbelief as an American soldier risked his life to save one of their own. Some whispered, others wept silently. In that instant, enemy lines blurred into human fragility. Meanwhile, American infantry provided covering fire. Officers had noted Harris's actions, but allowed him the freedom to act. They understood that his courage under fire inspired more than fear. It reinforced the values the Army claimed to uphold. The officer, semi-conscious, clutched Harris's arm. "Danke," he whispered, his voice raspy. Harris offered no reply, focusing instead on the terrain, on the safest path through the rubble, and on the next explosion echoing through the village. Time stretched unnaturally. Every step was measured in inches. Each inch taken was a decision between life and death. The line between bravery and recklessness blurred. Finally, Harris reached relative safety, a partially collapsed building offering cover for both men. He signaled for a stretcher team, who arrived moments later. Together, they lifted the German officer, carrying him toward an aid station behind the American lines. The German commander of the unit, watching from across the rubble, did not fire. He had expected hatred, vengeance, perhaps humiliation. Instead, he saw mercy, raw, uncalculated, and uncompromising. That day, one man's choice redefined the battlefield. It was not artillery or tanks that decided this moment, but courage tempered with compassion. In the quiet after the rescue, Harris sat back, hands trembling, mud caked on his face. Around him, the war raged, yet a single act of humanity had survived the fire. The officer's life had been spared, and in doing so, Harris had carved a space for morality in a place where it seemed impossible. The story did not end there. The ripple effects of his action would travel through the ranks, influence enemy soldiers' perceptions, and leave a legacy that outlasted the immediate violence of the Lorraine campaign. The battlefield had been cruel, unforgiving, and merciless. Yet, for one fleeting moment, it had bowed to mercy. The medic had delivered the wounded German officer to relative safety, but the war around them did not pause. Lorraine's village remained a cratered landscape of chaos. Buildings blackened by fire, streets littered with debris, and the air thick with smoke and acrid gunpowder. Harris took a moment to scan the surroundings. American infantry were advancing cautiously, while German snipers and machine gunners fired sporadically from hidden positions. Each sound of gunfire reminded him that danger was still omnipresent. Yet something extraordinary had occurred. German soldiers, those who had moments before seen him as the enemy, watched silently as stretcher teams carried their wounded comrade. Some lowered their rifles. Some, eyes wide, nodded ever so slightly, as though acknowledging a truth that transcended orders and allegiance. Humanity could survive even in the most violent of places. The German officer, stabilized but still pale, whispered thanks in broken English. Harris offered only a brief nod, checking the wounds one last time before leaving him in the care of the medical team. Words were unnecessary. The act itself had communicated everything. Nearby, a German commander, observing from the ruins of what had been a town hall, could not conceal his disbelief. He had been trained to expect ruthlessness, efficiency, and the elimination of the enemy without hesitation. And yet, here was a soldier of the opposing army, risking life and limb to save one of his men. He recorded the moment in his mind as a rare exception, a defiance of expectation that left an imprint far beyond the battle. This was not a singular instance of heroism alone. It became a tactical pivot, if only psychologically. German troops, witnessing acts of mercy, sometimes hesitated in their attacks, questioning the nature of enmity. American soldiers, too, were reminded of the moral lines they were defending even as they fought through destruction. Courage now carried an ethical weight as heavy as a rifle or a tank. As Harris returned to his unit, he encountered more wounded, both German and American. The firefight had moved forward, and the medic's role demanded constant movement. The war never waited. Yet the echo of that earlier rescue lingered. Soldiers whispered of what they had seen, retelling the story in hushed tones that combined awe and disbelief. For those few moments, a battlefield had transformed into a space where mercy dictated the pace of survival. Later, after the fighting subsided, reports would document the extraordinary bravery of medics like Harris. Accounts described not only his actions under fire, but also the profound reactions of the German soldiers saved. Commanders on both sides took note. Some questioned the decision, fearing it might encourage laxity among troops. Others recognized its deeper significance, a reminder that the humanity of war did not always reside in victory or defeat, but in individual acts of conscience. The psychological impact was immediate. Captured German soldiers later spoke of the rescue with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. They remembered being bandaged, lifted, and carried by someone they had been trained to fear. This memory became a touchstone for post-war reconciliation, a reminder that even in the heart of a brutal campaign, the capacity for compassion endured, and so the battlefield, scarred and violent, held a momentary pause, a breath between gunfire and artillery, between hate and survival. One man, armed only with courage, training, and a Red Cross armband, had rewritten the rules of engagement in a microcosm of war. He had demonstrated that even in the most relentless conflict, morality could manifest in tangible, life-saving action. Harris, exhausted but resolute, would continue to treat the wounded until the battle ended. Yet that day, the image of a German officer, stabilized and breathing under his care, remained vivid. It became a symbol of duty transcending hatred, of humanity persisting amid devastation, and of the quiet power of mercy when all else demanded brutality. In the chaos of Lorraine, amidst crumbling villages and relentless gunfire, a single act had reshaped not the map, but the moral landscape of the battlefield. That day, the war had not paused, but the rules of the heart had asserted themselves, and the consequences of that assertion would unfold in the aftermath. The village of Lorraine eventually fell fully into American hands, its streets quiet except for the distant rumble of artillery. The fighting moved on, leaving behind shattered buildings, broken bodies, and memories that would last a lifetime. Yet, among the soldiers who survived, one story resonated far beyond the battlefield: the story of the medic who had saved a wounded enemy under fire. Field. Reports filed that day mentioned a U.S. Army medic demonstrating extraordinary bravery by administering aid to enemy wounded under active fire. Names were recorded, citations passed up the chain of command, but the full significance was often lost amid the ongoing chaos of the front. The act was exceptional, not only for its courage, but for its rare defiance of expectation. Mercy in the middle of combat. American soldiers who had witnessed it spoke in quiet, reverent tones. They recounted the tension of watching their comrade risk life and limb, the disbelief of seeing a German officer being bandaged and lifted safely. In the ranks, these moments became moral reference points, examples of courage that were not measured in kills or territory gained, but in lives preserved. The Germans, too, registered the event. Captured soldiers and officers described it later in reports and post-war interviews. Some noted that the act changed their perception of the enemy. It challenged the narrative drilled into them that Americans were unfeeling conquerors, incapable of mercy. Instead, they saw the contradiction: a soldier risking everything to save someone who had moments before been a target. The dissonance left a lasting psychological impression. Commanders on both sides reacted in their own ways. Some German officers formally recorded the incident, noting the unusual restraint shown by the medic and the moral courage it represented. In the American chain of command, Officers recognized that while battlefield regulations did not demand such acts, they strengthened the ethical core of the unit, reinforcing discipline and trust among men. The immediate tactical outcome was minor. One officer saved, a few moments of cover gained, the village secured. But the intangible effects were profound. Morale improved among American troops who witnessed the act, while some German soldiers, now prisoners or retreating, carried a complicated mixture of awe and respect that softened their hatred. Beyond the battlefield, word of such acts spread slowly. Letters home, personal diaries, and post-war memoirs preserved the memory. Veterans would recount how these small human gestures reminded them that even in the worst of circumstances, decisions could reflect conscience as much as strategy. This first wave of aftermath demonstrated the duality of war. Destruction on a massive scale, yet moments of ethical clarity that stood out as islands of humanity. It set the stage for the enduring legacy of battlefield mercy, a theme that would echo long after Lorraine was reduced to ruins. Weeks and months after the Lorraine campaign, the story of the medic who saved a German officer continued to ripple through both armies, shaping perceptions and altering the moral landscape of war. Within the American forces, medics who witnessed the act reported a renewed sense of purpose. The war demanded unyielding brutality, yet here was evidence that courage and compassion could coexist. Units began to recognize the strategic and human value of medics, not only for treating comrades, but for demonstrating the ethical standards the Army hoped to instill. Orders were not issued to repeat such actions indiscriminately. The battlefield was unforgiving. Yet commanders quietly respected those who chose humanity over expedience. For the Germans, the memory endured in different ways. Surviving officers recorded their amazement in diaries and post-war interviews, noting that the event challenged their understanding of the enemy. Soldiers who had been treated recalled the medic's actions with a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and a profound re-evaluation of what it meant to be human in war. These experiences became part of a broader narrative during post-war reconciliation, informing attitudes toward former enemies and influencing early humanitarian thinking in military doctrine. The act also contributed to a subtle shift in military ethics. Reports of medics crossing fire to aid the enemy reinforced the importance of the Geneva Convention's principles, demonstrating that adherence to moral obligations was possible even amid total war. In training programs after 1945, examples like this were cited to illustrate how courage and conscience could guide decisions, showing that mercy was not a liability, but a testament to discipline and humanity. At a personal level, the medic himself, like many who performed extraordinary acts under fire, carried the memory quietly. He did not boast, did not seek accolades, yet the gratitude of those he saved lingered in letters, memoirs, and veteran recollections. The German officer, in later years, spoke of the American medic as a symbol of hope and moral clarity, a man who defied the chaos of combat to affirm life over death. The broader significance of this event extended beyond immediate survival. It demonstrated that the battlefield was not solely defined by weapons and tactics, but also by choices. Each act of mercy challenged the inevitability of hatred, proving that even in a war defined by destruction, individual decisions could assert humanity's enduring capacity for empathy. And so, the Lorraine campaign was marked not just by strategic victories and losses, but by the quieter triumphs of conscience. Acts like the medic's did not alter maps or front lines, yet they reshaped human memory, leaving a legacy that influenced how future generations would interpret courage, honor, and moral responsibility in war. From the mud of a devastated village to the quiet remembrance decades later, one man's decision to save a wounded enemy became a testament to the enduring power of mercy, a principle that outlived the conflict and inspired those who came after. The echoes of that choice set the stage for reflection, a calm, philosophical closure to the story, where the meaning of war, humanity, and moral courage can be fully contemplated. War is a landscape of extremes, violence and fear, destruction and despair. It demands choices that strip life to its rawest elements. Yet even in such darkness, moments of clarity shine through, revealing the enduring capacity for compassion. The story of a U.S. medic saving a wounded German officer under fire is more than a tale of bravery. It is a testament to humanity's resilience, a reminder that moral courage does not require a weapon, only conscience. In the midst of artillery, smoke, and chaos, one man chose life over expedience, mercy over indifference. That choice reverberated far beyond the battlefield. Acts like these challenge the conventional narratives of war. Victory is often measured in territory gained, enemies defeated, or battles won. But the true measure lies also in what survives the carnage: dignity, honor, and the recognition of shared humanity. A single act of mercy can ripple across ranks, nations, and decades, shaping perceptions and fostering reconciliation long after guns fall silent. This story reminds us that in war, compassion is not weakness. It is a profound assertion of moral strength. It teaches that even in the most extreme conditions, humans retain the capacity to care for one another, transcending uniform, language, and nationality. History is filled with battles, strategies, and tactics, but it is these human moments, fleeting yet eternal, that define our collective conscience. The medic's courage endures as a symbol that life matters, even when everything around it screams otherwise, that empathy can exist amid destruction, and that morality, though tested, is never truly lost. In the ruins of Lorraine and in the hearts of those who witnessed it, mercy claimed its own victory. It stands as a quiet, enduring reminder that even in the darkest chapters of history, humanity can prevail.